Tunisia. North Africa. Summer, 1943. The air shimmered at 40 degrees Celsius, rising in translucent waves off the bleached desert floor. The sand was the color of old bone, and it got into everything, into rifle barrels, into boot seams, into the corners of tired eyes. The campaign for North Africa had been brutal. Months of rolling armored combat across the Libyan plateau had left men hollow, their faces creased brown from the relentless sun, their lips cracked and peeling. American soldiers of the 1st Infantry Division sat in partial shade beneath canvas awnings, their boots caked with rust-colored dust, the sound of distant artillery still thrumming on the horizon like a slow, mechanical heartbeat. Then one of them reached into a crate and lifted out a bottle. It was brown, almost amber in the noon light, a thick, contoured glass bottle, curved at the waist like something engineered not merely to be held, but to be treasured. Condensation already forming on the outside, ice cold. Fizzing softly at the cap. An American soldier popped the top against the edge of the crate, tilted it back, and drank. Beside him, a captured German officer watched in silence. His uniform was frayed at the collar. His canteen had been empty for hours. He stared at that bottle the way a man stares at something he has been told does not exist, with a confusion that borders on betrayal. He had been told, with great certainty and official conviction, that America was a nation of soft men producing nothing of consequence. He had been told it repeatedly, clearly, and by voices that carried the full authority of the state. But now he was watching a soldier in the middle of a war zone drink an ice-cold Coca-Cola as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. And in that moment, something shifted, quietly, irrevocably, beneath the surface of everything he believed. This is not just the story of a soft drink. This is the story of how a single brown bottle became one of the most quietly devastating psychological weapons of the Second World War. To understand what Coca-Cola meant on the battlefields of 1943, it is necessary to first understand what it meant in the streets of Berlin in 1933. The drink had arrived in Germany 4 years earlier, carried across the Atlantic by a larger-than-life American entrepreneur named Ray Rivington Powers, who began bottling it for German consumption in 1929. Powers was a theatrical character. He reportedly spoke broken German on purpose, made extravagant promises to investors, and operated with the theatrical confidence of a man who knew he had a product the world would fall for. And he was right. By 1933, the year Adolf Hitler rose to supreme power in Germany, Coca-Cola had grown from 6,000 cases a year to 100,000. That number was impossible to ignore. The Coca-Cola Company soon transferred its German operations to Coca-Cola GmbH, a local subsidiary, and the drink burrowed deeper into the fabric of daily German life. A young and driven businessman named Max Keith took over the company's German branch and immediately transformed it, expanding bottling plants, professionalizing distribution networks, and launching advertising blitzes that rivaled anything seen in the American market. Billboards appeared near train stations. Ads ran in newspapers. Coca-Cola salesmen moved through factories and construction sites with the organized aggression of a field campaign. The marketing alignment was striking, even by the standards of the era. Whenever Adolf Hitler appeared on the cover of a German magazine, a Coca-Cola advertisement appeared on the back. When the Nazi Minister of Propaganda Joseph Goebbels booked the Sportpalast Stadium for one of his thunderous mass rallies, Coca-Cola billboards stood outside, right where the party faithful queued in the cold. The two red banners, one with a swastika, one with a contoured bottle, flew in unwitting, deeply ironic proximity. By 1937, the company was openly declaring that its beverage was a Volksgetränk, a drink for all Germans. Even Hermann Göring, the second most powerful man in the Third Reich, was reportedly photographed pausing at a Coca-Cola stand to enjoy a cold glass of the American brew. And then there was the Führer himself. Hitler, who did not drink alcohol, reportedly sipped Coca-Cola as he screened films in his private theater, including according to historian Mark Pendergrast in his definitive account for God, Country, and Coca-Cola, the American epic Gone with the Wind. The most anti-American leadership on earth was quietly, privately addicted to the most American of products. The irony was rich, and history would not let it pass without consequence. But ideological consistency was never the Third Reich's most reliable quality, and the public posture of the Nazi state toward America was built on contempt. To the architects of Nazi propaganda, the United States was a mongrel nation, racially impure, culturally shallow, industrially bloated, but spiritually empty. American men were portrayed as soft, undisciplined, and accustomed to comfort rather than sacrifice. American culture, to the mind of the Reich, was a thin veneer of consumer goods stretched over a moral void. It was jazz and cinema and sweetened water. It was everything the steeled, disciplined, ideologically fortified German soldier was supposed to rise above. German propaganda in the early years of the war portrayed American involvement as the flailing of a soft society that could not possibly endure the rigors of total war against the fighting men of the Wehrmacht. In 1942, Otto Dietrich, the Nazi press chief and one of the most powerful voices in the Reich's information apparatus, summed up the official attitude with blunt contempt. America never contributed anything to the world but chewing gum and Coca-Cola. It was meant as an insult, a dismissal. The statement was designed to frame American civilization as fundamentally trivial, unable to produce anything of lasting value or martial worth. Chewing gum and Coca-Cola. Sweet, frivolous, disposable. The sort of thing a soldier could mock between rifle drills and not think about again. But Otto Dietrich had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He had looked at a symbol and seen only the surface of it. He had tasted a culture and confused its pleasures for its weaknesses. And in the years that followed, the soft brown bottle of Coca-Cola would travel further, reach more men, and do more damage to the Nazi worldview than almost any piece of conventional propaganda the Allies ever produced. When the United States formally entered the war, following the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the Atlantic trade blockade immediately severed the pipeline of Coca-Cola syrup to Germany. The factories of Coca-Cola GmbH in Berlin and Hamburg went quiet. Max Keith, determined to keep his operations running, did what the Germans had always done in adversity. He improvised. He gathered the scraps the wartime economy had left available, leftover apple fibers from cider presses, whey residue from cheese production, and other agricultural byproducts that no one else wanted. From these mismatched, depleted ingredients, he produced a new beverage in 1940, calling it Fanta, derived from the German word fantasy, meaning imagination. The contrast was not lost on history. While America was preparing to bottle Coca-Cola for millions of soldiers around the globe, Germany was drinking a thin, pale substitute made from apple pulp and industrial waste. One nation had the original. The other had the echo. One had abundance. The other was making do. Across the Atlantic in Atlanta, Georgia, the president of the Coca-Cola Company, Robert W. Woodruff, had already made his intentions clear. When the United States entered the war, Woodruff issued a commitment that would define the company's role in the conflict. Every man in uniform gets a bottle of Coca-Cola for 5 cents wherever he is and whatever it costs the company. That pledge, 5 cents, anywhere on earth, regardless of cost, was not simply a business decision. It was a declaration of principle. It was the assertion that American soldiers, no matter where the war took them, would carry a piece of home with them. That comfort was not a luxury. That pleasure was not weakness. That a nation capable of delivering joy to its soldiers, in the desert, in the jungle, and on the open sea, was a nation that understood something about the relationship between the human spirit and the will to fight. On June 29, 1943, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, commanding Allied forces from his headquarters in North Africa, dispatched an urgent telegram to Coca-Cola's offices in Atlanta. His message was direct, almost startling in its specificity. He requested 3 million bottled Coca-Colas, complete equipment for 10 portable bottling plants, and the materials needed to sustain production of 6 million bottles per month. He was asking for a soft drink with the same organizational urgency one uses to request ammunition. Eisenhower had watched his soldiers. He understood something that no military field manual had ever formally codified, that morale is not abstract, and that the difference between a man who fights well and a man who fights desperately is often found in the small things. A letter from home. A song on a radio. A taste, familiar and cold and unmistakably American, in the middle of a desert that wanted to swallow them whole. The Coca-Cola company responded with a speed and ambition that matched the scale of the request. Civilian professionals were recruited, given Army fatigues, and dispatched with a rank equivalent to commissioned officers. They were called technical observers, though the soldiers they served quickly gave them a warmer and more memorable title. They called them the Coca-Cola Colonels. 148 of them fanned out across the theaters of war, hauling portable bottling equipment through North African sand, through the rubble of liberated Italian villages, across the Pacific to jungle airfields and remote island outposts. 2 of them would not come home. Their names entered the rolls of American sacrifice, not as combat soldiers, but as men who had followed the Army's thirst. What began as 10 portable plants became 64 fully operational bottling facilities by the end of the war, established across Europe, North Africa, and Asia. From the steaming Pacific island of Saipan to the snow-dusted hills of the Italian campaign, the sound of carbonation filling glass bottles became one of the distinctive sounds of the Allied advance. The Coca-Cola Colonels were not fighting with rifles, but they were, in their own way, fighting. They were maintaining the belief that what the men were fighting for was worth having, that victory was not just the absence of war, but the return to a life worth living. In November 1943, soldiers of the 133rd Field Artillery Regiment, Battery C of the 36th Division, dug into the front lines near San Michele, Italy, opened crates delivered by a Coca-Cola colonel, and drank their first bottles in more than a year. Photographs taken that day show men grinning, their rifles slings still over their shoulders, bottles raised. The expression on their faces is not merely satisfaction. It is recognition. It is the look of men who have been reminded why they are still willing to endure. American GIs wrote home about Coca-Cola with an intimacy that surprised even company archivists who later cataloged the letters. One private, stationed in Paris, wrote to his wife, "Well, I just came back from the Coke bar. In case I haven't told you before, they did away with the beer parlor and put in a Coke bar. Boy, but they sure taste good after going without them for so long. I had rather have the Cokes as the beer." Another soldier, writing in the microfilm V-mail format that compressed letters to save cargo weight aboard supply ships, described the arrival of 2 bottles in his unit as causing a celebration that eclipsed the arrival of whiskey. According to records preserved at the American Scholar Journal, an unusually large number of GI letters home specifically mentioned fighting, among other reasons, for the right to drink Coca-Cola. This was not irony. This was not simple-mindedness. This was an instinctive and profound articulation of what the war was actually about. The freedom to enjoy ordinary pleasures, to live without the state telling you what to drink, what to think, and what to want. The bottle in their hands was not a prop. It was a premise. In Naples, in the autumn of 1943, 2 soldiers of the 178th Field Artillery received a care package from a friend who had returned to the United States. Inside, wrapped in a pair of socks, were 2 bottles of Coca-Cola, physically shipped across the Atlantic, nestled in fabric to survive the journey. They savored one together. The other they decided to raffle, with proceeds going to families of men in the battalion who had been killed in action. The auction drew so much attention, such fervent bidding from soldiers across the camp, that it raised over $4,000. The Coca-Cola company contributed another $2,000 when they heard the story. War correspondent Ernie Pyle, who lived with the unit and witnessed the moment, recorded it with characteristic plainness. The one remaining bottle of Coke, he wrote, was equal in value to 80,000 bottles back home. The sergeant who won the raffle later said he believed he should carry it back to America as a souvenir, not to drink, but to show. And then there were the prisoners. Beginning in 1943, as Allied forces swept through North Africa and then up the spine of Italy, thousands of German soldiers entered American captivity. They arrived exhausted, ideologically saturated, and wholly unprepared for what they were about to encounter. The machine of Nazi propaganda had spent years constructing a portrait of America as a nation in decline, overcrowded, racially confused, morally weak, industrially inferior. German soldiers had been told that American factories were inefficient, that American soldiers were soft, that American abundance was exaggerated propaganda designed to inflate a hollow nation's self-image. Camp Crossville, Tennessee. Summer 1943. German prisoners of war arrived at an American processing facility and were escorted through grounds that bore no resemblance to anything their ideology had prepared them for. The facilities were clean. The food was abundant, provided in accordance with the Geneva Convention, often at a quality that exceeded what many of the prisoners had experienced in the German military during the lean years of the war. And in the canteens of these camps, available for purchase, chilled and fizzing in distinctive contoured glass bottles, was Coca-Cola. One English-speaking German prisoner, encountered near a Coca-Cola hoarding in New Jersey in 1945, paused and stared. His guard, confused by the sudden arrest of movement, asked what was wrong. "We are surprised," the prisoner said carefully, "that you have Coca-Cola here too." The guard did not immediately understand why this was surprising. The prisoner could not immediately explain that in Germany, the syrup had stopped arriving years before, that the real thing had become a wartime memory replaced by pale Fanta made from apple scraps, and that seeing this abundance, this casual, commercial, freely available abundance, meant that everything he had been told about American scarcity and weakness was not simply wrong, but was the precise inverse of the truth. Documented accounts from multiple American POW facilities recorded the same stunned disorientation among captured German soldiers: ice cream in the dining facility, white bread with each meal, meat portions that would have seemed extraordinary on the Eastern Front, and always available at the canteen window, for a matter of sense, the brown bottle with the contoured waist. The product that Otto Dietrich had dismissed as America's only contribution to civilization had, in the context of the camps, become something else entirely. It had become evidence. Evidence of a system that produced enough food, enough comfort, enough sweetness, to provide it not merely to its own citizens, but to its captured enemies in wartime. Many German prisoners, according to documented records from the Veterans Breakfast Club and the academic literature of the era, came out of American captivity profoundly altered, not radically converted, but quietly unsettled. The ideology of German superiority had rested, in part, on a premise of disciplined scarcity, the belief that hardship produced virtue, that sacrifice proved strength, that abundance was the rot of decadent nations. The American camp had not argued with this premise. It had simply refuted it, meal by meal, bottle by bottle, with the calm indifference of a nation that did not need to make its case with words, because it had already made it with supply chains. Meanwhile, on the other side of those same supply chains, the machinery of the Coca-Cola operation had grown into something that no general had ever commanded and no military historian had ever anticipated. By the war's end, 64 bottling lines had been established across the combat theaters of the world, staffed by 148 technical observers who had never fired a weapon in anger but had followed the front lines with the patient, logistical determination of quartermaster. Angels. More than 5 billion bottles of Coca-Cola were distributed to American service personnel during the course of the war. 5 billion individual moments of cold, fizzing familiarity in the middle of the machinery of death. The portable plants traveled to places the military planners had barely mapped. Jungle airfields in the South Pacific received small, green-painted mobile soda fountains, modified to include ice-making components, that arrived in the back of jeeps and were immediately nicknamed, with the soldiers' instinct for warm humor in dark places, the jungle fountains. The pilots of B-26 bombers based in Australia requested 100 more units after the first arrived. The phrase circulated among them with the ease of a new proverb: a Jeep and a nickel Coke. In the advertising pages of Life magazine in 1944, Coca-Cola ran campaigns that captured something the company's marketing team understood intuitively and the military would only later articulate formally, that what soldiers were fighting for was not ideology in the abstract, but the texture of the life they had left behind and the promise of the life they hoped to return to. One wartime advertisement depicted American pilots sharing laughter with Chinese airmen, bottles raised between them. The caption read, "Have a Coke, good winds have blown you here." Another read, "Coca-Cola stands for the pause that refreshes," a flashback to their own way of living. By 1944, the company had adopted an official wartime slogan printed on promotional materials from North Africa to New Guinea, the global high sign. A universal greeting, a shared language, a bottle passed between two hands is the most elemental diplomatic gesture imaginable. When the war ended in Europe in May 1945 and then in the Pacific in September, Max Keith in Berlin sent his first telegram to Coca-Cola's headquarters in Atlanta, since the American entry into the war had silenced communications between them 3 years before. His message was brief, almost comical in its businesslike composure. Given the total devastation of the nation around him, Coca-Cola GmbH still functioning, it read. Send auditors. The man who had made Fanta from apple pulp and whey because the real thing could not reach him had survived the war, the Reich, and the rubble. And his first instinct was to re-establish contact with the original. He had spent 5 years producing the imitation. Now he wanted the real thing back. That telegram, read in full historical light, is one of the strangest and most telling documents of the entire war. It is the closing of a circle. The nation that had mocked American consumer culture had been making a pale substitute of its most famous product throughout the entire conflict, while the nation it mocked was manufacturing 5 billion originals and handing them to soldiers for 5 cents in the desert, in the jungle, and the snow. Otto Dietrich had said that America never contributed anything but chewing gum and Coca-Cola. He did not live to fully reckon with what Coca-Cola had, in the end, contributed, not in the narrow sense of calories or refreshment, but in the deep and durable sense of what a free society signals to the world about its own nature and its own capacity and its own unshakable confidence that the good life is not a reward to be earned through suffering, but a right worth defending at enormous cost. There is a detail from Mark Pendergrass's exhaustive history of the Coca-Cola Company that deserves to rest quietly at the center of this story as its truest symbol. In the summer of 1943, a German prisoner of war stood before a Coca-Cola billboard on the road to a New Jersey processing facility and stopped walking. Around him were guards, other prisoners, the American landscape, abundant and bewildering. And he stared at that red and white sign with the contoured bottle at its center, and he said, simply and honestly, that he had not known it was here too. He had not known. He had been told that this thing, this particular pleasure, this specific sweetness, this ordinary, democratic, endlessly reproducible comfort belonged only to a soft and decadent nation, soon to be subdued by the disciplined armies of a new order. He had believed it the way men believe the things they are told in youth, completely, without the evidence of experience to complicate the certainty. And now he was standing in a country that had not rationed Coca-Cola even in wartime, a country that had shipped 6 million bottles a month to its soldiers, a country that had built 64 bottling plants in combat zones so that no man in uniform would go long without a taste of what he was fighting for. He had come expecting to find a wasteland dressed in advertisement, and he had found instead a civilization so secure in its abundance that it could afford, even in its darkest hours, to be generous with the small and beautiful things. The bottle traveled with the armies. It crossed the same oceans, climbed the same hills, waited in the same supply depots alongside ammunition and blood plasma. It was not a weapon in the conventional sense. It fired nothing, wounded nothing, destroyed nothing. But it carried a message that no rifle could articulate and no bomb could deliver. The message was this: the side that could afford to bring you sweetness in the middle of war was the side that understood what the war was actually for. Not conquest, not ideology, not the glory of a state that fed its people on discipline and scarcity, and the promise of tomorrow's reward. But the here and the now, and the cold bottle in the hand, and the right of every ordinary man to taste something good in the world, he was being asked to risk everything to preserve. The Germans had mocked it. The Reich had dismissed it. The propaganda machine had reduced it to a symbol of American triviality. But triviality does not build 64 factories on the edge of combat zones. Weakness does not follow an army across 3 continents in the pockets of men who believe so deeply in what they carry that 2 of them are buried for having carried it. Freedom has many faces, many voices, many forms. But on the battlefields of 1943, it had a smell. Cold glass and caramelized sugar and carbonation rising from a brown bottle, curved at the waist, condensating in the desert heat, and it traveled far further than any flag ever flew, and it outlasted every empire that was foolish enough to call it small. Over 5 billion bottles, 64 plants, 148 Coca-Cola kernels, 5 cents, wherever he is, whatever it costs. That was not a marketing campaign. That was a nation telling the world what it believed about the worth of an ordinary man. And the world, even the part that had spent years trying to defeat it, was listening.